topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Alise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Great to have you back. Thanks for tuning in again this week. This show has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2025, and I'm happy to share that it is listed on the top 10 most inspirational leadership podcasts on the web. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. If we have not met yet and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a culture and leadership activated by meaning and purpose. Our mission is to help our clients create a destination workplace where people flock to join, are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, can grow into their full potential, and are committed to stay and dynamically deliver on the company's mission, which all translates to bottom line results for you. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or alisecortez.com. Getting into today's program, we have with us today Dr. Maja Djikic. Sorry, I'll get her name right. She is a personality psychologist specializing in adult development. She is an associate professor of organizational behavior and HR management, the executive director of the Self-Development Laboratory, and the academic director of the Rotman Executive Coaching Certificate Program at the Rotman School of Management, University of Toronto. She is the author of The Possible Self, a leader's guide to personal development, which we'll be talking about today. She joined today from Toronto, Canada. Dr. Djikic, welcome to Working on Purpose.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. I told you before we got on air, I learned so much from your beautiful book, Maja. This is just gorgeous. I mean, it's wonderful to be delighted when I encounter new principles that I haven't before. So we're going to dive into this for our listeners and viewers so they can learn as well. Right. So the first thing that I really want to start with celebrating, as you say in your book, the central premise of your book is that no matter how long we have been stuck or how hard we have struggled to change, we can get unstuck and we can keep growing. I love that. That's so exciting and empowering.
You know, I find that people sometimes consider getting a little stagnant as a part of just a normal aging process. They think, well, I guess this is what adulthood is. It's to be a little tired and very drained, kind of a little apathetic, and you just have to go through your duties. But that's actually not our natural state, and we can enter into it no matter whether at 20 or 40 or 60 or 80 or 99.
You know, I really, of course, I help develop leaders and cultures, and I do encounter people that say things like, hey, that's just the way I am. That's just my personality or the whatever. And I think, you know, that's what they think that's their hall pass, to just sort of stay as they are and, you know, not try to work on changing and growing. So I like that you are definitively directly challenging that.
Absolutely. There's tons of research showing that we are a continually grow, you know, it's not like we're plants and grow to maturity and just stay there. We are continually growing all the way until our very last breath. So and I really want people to understand that seriously, because I think sometimes people think in life stages, oh, this is my development life stage, and this is the one where I just settle in or I retire. There's only more and more. If you really want to fulfill, to get to your purpose, to get to your potential, it is always more growth, and not as in this kind of heavy, oh, I have to grow, but in this exciting, I get to do this. I still get to grow until the very last moment.
I love it. I wouldn't be doing what I do if I didn't believe that, of course. Okay, so let's dive in here. So I love your wheel of self concept, and I appreciate that you come right out and you say that one of the reasons we fail to change is that we often focus our attempts on just our behaviors. So if you could talk a little bit about, why do we tend to focus there and what's wrong with just focusing on our behaviors?
So, I find that that's the message that people get a lot from the environment, even from psychologists. There's a lot of books out there that says really, let's focus on behavior and behavior change. And I think the reason why people fixate on behavior is because it's visible, right? So I can see your behavior, you see my behavior, no matter your intent or your emotions, it's the behavior I have to deal with. So then I would fixate on that. So it's visible. It's measurable. I can tell, if you have decided, let's say you want to exercise, I can tell whether or not you exercise and how many minutes. And that visibility and measurability and focus on it makes us forget that we are not just our behavior, but all the other parts of the self, that we are our emotions, we are our thoughts, we are our motivations or desires, and we're basically the history, our body, which carries the history of everything we've learned in our lifetime that we carry with ourselves. So those other four parts really, and behavior is just one part of it. And I would argue not the crucial part for change. I think if it were a chessboard, I think of the behavior as a pawn because it's so impacted by it. So your behavior is impacted by what you want. It's impacted by your emotions. It's impacted by your thoughts. It's impacted by your history. So in a sense, it's just the end result of the dynamic of all the other forces. And when people just want to change, what they're doing is let's say that you decide that you want to wake up in the morning and you want to exercise every morning and you're just focusing using your willpower to change the behavior. What you're doing, you're taking one part of the wheel, you're taking one spoke and you're pushing it one way while the rest of the wheel is bearing on you the other way. And no surprise that most of the time the end result is us defeating ourselves, self-fragmentation. We're basically fighting ourselves and then defeating ourselves. It's a really strange fight of self against self that we engage in when we're just trying to change our behavior.
And that's where we get some of those sayings like we are our own worst enemies, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So I wanted this other piece. I just want to read this short little passage here and have you comment on it. I thought it was so powerful. You say in your book, instead of considering personality traits as our destinations, we can think of them as early in our skills, as temporary plateaus from which we continue to grow. Instead of seeing our undeveloped traits as boxes in which we had better get comfortable, we can leave them and develop parts of ourselves long left dormant.
Yes. We have misunderstood personality deeply. I have been trained as a personality psychologist, so my PhD is in personality psychology. And the level of misunderstanding we have gotten to is, I find, very destructive. So first thing is that personality traits are not genetic. Our temperament is, which is sort of physiological tendencies, sensitivities. And what they turn into is, well, what is personality? Some sort of stable way that we're with others for a period of time. And so what happens is, let's say you have, some sort of physiological predisposition. Let's say, I don't know, you're sensitive to sound and you are landed in a family, which you don't choose. We're landed in a family, we're thrown into a family of musicians. Now, that family would take your sensitivity to sound to be a fantastic thing. And chances are you might develop it, might become a musician, become very extroverted. So your personality trait is it is a skill, early skill of dealing with your temperament in a particular environment. If you take the same temperamental tendency, which is sensitivity to sound, and we throw into a different family, let's say you pick academics who are writing all the time and they don't want to be disturbed by people making sound, well, then you're going to learn that the best way to be is just to withdraw from everybody else, right? And so then you would develop introversion, or let's say that you are thrown into a family where people like to tease you a lot. Well, you might develop shyness. And so what I find is that early trait, what we think of personality trait, that's something we learn how to do in order to survive or flourish in our early environment. What I find, that box that we box ourselves in when we say, I am, and then followed by something, it's like a little box that you stay in it, you end up preventing yourself from being able to do all sorts of things. So in my mind, our our potential, our purpose and potential are exactly on the opposite end of what we think. It's a set of skills we haven't learned yet. So if I'm an introvert and I know how to be by myself, my potential is knowing how to be with others. If I know how to be with others, I can also know how to be by myself. If I'm assertive, maybe I need to learn how to become agreeable. If I'm very agreeable, I can also learn to become assertive. So we realize basically that this thing of thinking that we are one box is a limiting, imprisoning us within these, rather commercially successful personality testing boxes that we end up staying inside. And the industry is worth something like $2.2 billion. And so, and it turns out not really to predict much, but it tells us who we are supposedly, and we're supposed to stay in our little box. I find that belief that we end up with ends up being very destructive, because if you don't know that you're not the box, well, you never try to get out of it.
Right. I love that. It's, again, so empowering. I like to think that, for me, I love the way that I've seen my own development is I consider it like it's been a process of unfolding. And yes, there have been catalysts along the way that have really helped that. But I have delighted in how much I have grown and changed over my 5 decades. Just delighted by it. So I find it very encouraging. Sorry, my light is going just crazy. It's got a little bit of an issue going. I think it's tired, or maybe giving up the good fight. Anyway, okay, so let's go on and talk about your wheel of self. I want to talk about each one of the components, and I want to start with motivation, which really speaks to, as you say, our wants. Can you start there?
People often tell me, oh, I'm trying to, let's say they like to have a donut in the afternoon, and they tell me, oh, I want to change so I don't have the donut in the afternoon. And I always tell them it's not about not having the donut, it's about not wanting the donut, which is a different thing, right? So when people say, well, I'm trying to change my behavior, I'm trying not to yell at my kids, it's not about not yelling, it's about not having the impulse. And this, our motivational system fundamentally is what decides what is going to come easy and what's going to be developmental. Or if we work against our wants, it becomes what it's going to be hard, and what's going to kind of pour out of our cup of willpower is going to drain us. Because if we are working all the time against the thing we want, we will get very drained and potentially burnt out as a consequence. So we need to think about, okay, this thing of wanting, how do we change the desire and to be aligned with our development, and to know how to read our wants and desires, not in this kind of moralistic, this is a good thing to want, this is a bad thing to want, which people tend to do. They tend to say, sometimes when people raise children, they tell them, listen, here's a menu of what you're supposed to want in life.
Right.
Pick from your menu of wants, please, right? You can be these professions, you can have this kind of partner, here's where you can live. And what it kills is our wants are our desires are the only link thread that we have towards our potential. So if we stop paying attention, we say, I'm dropping this thread, I'm just going to go what I think worked for other people, you lose that central connection to yourself that can guide you towards your development. So wants are very, very important to be able to get ourselves moving again.
And I really appreciate how you kind of give us a kind of a roadmap here. You talk about how there's 4 steps. Step 1 is to identify your wants. What do you actually want? What do you desire? Number 2 is exploring them. There's some that you've overlooked for a long time or left behind. 3 is exploring opposing or destructive wants. That's powerful. I want you to speak to that if you would. And 4 is choosing what you want to focus on. So could you just a little bit of that, exploring those opposing and destructive wants? What do you mean by that?
So, I present a hypothesis in the book that all wants, everything you desire, was at its origin developmental. Okay, and people find that unbelievable because they have the experience of wanting things that are bad for them. They want bad food, they want not to exercise, they want to engage in destructive or addictive activities. And what I tell them, that destructive or activity is not at the core, it's at the periphery of your motivational system. And it came about because something at the very core didn't get fulfilled. So if I've developed it, let's say that I'm not satisfied at work, and I develop a habit of drinking a couple of glasses of wine in the evening to forget about it, then that core, it's not the core want. So that destructive, potentially something that I'm doing that is not good for me, is pointing, I'm doing it in order to mask, to somehow try to get to that core want through a wrong method. And instead, I need to explore what is at the core of the thing do I want to be validated? Do I want to be seen and heard? Do I want to be loved? Do I want to engage creatively in my workplace in a way I haven't up to this point, right? What is that thing? And then note how, how if I don't have that, so unfulfilled want creates new layers of want that become increasingly dissociated from this developmental want at the core. So for example, let's say that I am addicted to shopping. So let's say at the core, I want acceptance and friendship and closeness. But I think that if I get the right kind of purse and the right kind of stuff, people will think I'm cool. That's one layer under. And then if I'm cool, they'll think that they want to hang out with me. And if they hang out with me, then I'm going to be accepted. You see how it's a whole set of layers. Something that I want at the periphery is pointing a finger. And I'm asking, look where the finger is pointing at the core. What do you want at the core? Because as soon as you fulfill it, that thing at the core is always developmental. Even when we look at very egregious, addictions, at the core, there's a desire to be loved. At the core, there's a desire to be accepted, to be validated, to engage creatively with the world in a meaningful way, all the kinds of things that you speak on your show. And if we don't fulfill that, what we develop is a culture in which we start wanting peripheral things that can't give us the thing that we are wanting.
Beautifully explained, Maja, beautifully explained. All right, and on that note, let's let our listeners and viewers kind of reflect on maybe some of their wants while we take our very first break. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We're on the air with Dr. Maja Djikic. She is the author of, sorry, I just lost that because my light is coming out here. She is the author of The Possible Self, a leader's guide to personal development, which is what we've been talking about. So far, we've covered one part of the wheel here, which is motivation. After the break, we're going to talk about behavior. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, as I am also dedicated to helping create a world where people can realize their potential in life and at work and are led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness. And we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. So the latest one that I put out came out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand the wants and needs of today's workforce and what you can do to address that. And then at the end, there are 22 best practices to help you create a culture to bring that out. If you are just joining me today, my guest is Dr. Maja Djikic. She is the author of The Possible Self, a leader's guide to personal development, which we've been talking about so far. So next, I want to go on. We opened a bit with the bit on behavior here, but I have to say, Maja, there's so many great things in your book, the way that you use language, like, this idea of helping us to understand the economy of willpower when it comes to behavior. I have not thought about behavior from the vantage point of willpower, and so not the economy of willpower. So let's talk about behavior as part of the wheel of self.
I think what got me thinking about it in terms of economy of willpower is the fact it's the burnout. It's it's people when they say I am drained. And let's say if you're working in an office, well, really, what are you doing? You're sitting there all day staring at a screen. And so what exactly is drained? Right? It's not like we've been digging ditches for half a day. So what is being drained? So what is being drained is this other thing, which is the willpower. And then the idea was, well, what spends it? How do you put in? What is the balance of the willpower? So willpower is something people use when they do something they don't want to do, or prevent themselves from doing something they want to do. And people have this belief that everything takes up willpower, and that's not true. When I do something I want, for example, I like to play tennis. Although tennis physically takes up energy, it pours back into my cup of willpower. So if I have a cup every morning, every time I do something I don't want to do, let's say I'm in a bad traffic, I pour a little bit out. But when I do something I want to do, I pour back in. And so what we need to figure out is what pours out of the cup of willpower and what pours in. And people tend to think that everything pours out. Anytime you do anything, it pours out, but that's not the case. It only pours out if you're doing something you don't want to do, or you're preventing yourself from doing something you want to do. And so if we start deeply thinking about it, we realize that work doesn't have to be a place where you're only pouring out. It can be a place where you're pouring in. Because up to this point, people, workplaces say, oh, burnout, well, just give people more vacation. And basically they have this concept, at work you pour out and go home and pour in there. When really at home, you might have a parent who has Alzheimer. You might have children who require care. So we need to think about workplace not only as a place that pours out, but that also pours in. And most of us need to understand and what is, what pours in, what pours out. And that depends on your wants. The things that you want, pour in. Things you don't want, pour out. So what is that balance for you in your day, in your month, over the years? That it's a kind of question that I wish everybody would ask themselves.
I'm smiling and laughing and enjoying this because so much of what I'm doing inside organizations is helping them create an environment in which people are better able to reach for their wants. They are energized because they're doing things that they're passionate about, that they love, etc. And so in so doing, they raise the whole vibration of the organization. So that's why I was kind of smiling when you were talking about that. It's like, oh yes, I know. Let's do this. Okay, well, let's go on to emotions. Again, each one of your wheel of self aspects, I just found the way that you described them to be so compelling. But one of the things that I think I really appreciate too is, you say that emotions are a signaling system that tells us where we stand in relation to our wants. Very powerful. I always know that emotions are vital data. They give us vital data, but situating them against our wants is fascinating.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think that people miss about emotions, which is that they're want or goal oriented. That without a goal or want, there is no emotion. And I think the reason for it is that sometimes we think that emotion just come upon us like it's a weather. Oh, there's a background of sadness or restlessness or something, right? But it's not there for no reason. If there's sadness, there has been some sort of a loss. If there has been a sense of restlessness or anxiety, there are some threats in your mind that are, and so we need to understand that it's a signaling system, and it starts with something that we want, whether consciously or unconsciously, and that the emotion's function is to alert you that if it's a negative emotion, it's to alert you that you have just are moving slightly away from it and to let you know how to get back on track. Most of us think of emotions as irrational, when really emotions are very rational and goal-oriented. We mistake a couple of seconds of our prefrontal cortex shutting down when we're very angry and very afraid. That's what we see. Oh, that's what emotion is. No, emotion is everything that happens after you have calmed down and thought, okay, what do I do as a consequence? So the way that I like to say it is that emotions want something from you. Figure out what is it that they want. What they want is for you to get closer to your goal, closer to something you want. And they're going to go away as soon as you figure out how to get there. So as long as you go through this, you're going to calm down and then go through this problem solving to see how you're going to get back on track. And as soon as you start moving in that direction, emotion is going to go away. It's a temporary process. It's not meant to stay, very energetically expensive. So it's really not meant to stick around for long. And so we need to really listen to it and process rapidly.
I think that is just so compelling, Maja. That's just so well explained. Okay, but now we got to go one step further. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody so beautifully distinguish happiness versus joy. Will you do that for us?
For sure. I think we often conflate these two emotions, and they're really two separate things. So happiness is an outcome-oriented emotion that basically says you have mentally set some kind of a goal and you have hit it. So let's say that I can say, oh, you know what? I want to get to the car wash before I get to work. And if you do it, you say, oh yeah, I'm happy. And what you'll get is a little kind of a peak. You have a little peak of dopamine saying, okay, you hit your goal. However, this goal doesn't at all need to be related to your potential. Okay. Joy is a signal to your self system that you are in the process of development. So happiness is a signal that you have hit some goal, decided, even if somebody else says, oh, this would be a good goal for you, you'll be, and you get there, you'd be, oh yeah, I'm happy for that. Temporary and goes away very fast. Joy, because it's a process oriented and not outcome oriented, can last a long time. And it can also be there combined with other emotions. So, and sometimes calling it joy, have us misunderstand its meaning. We can develop inside of a very difficult situation. We can grow. Let's say we have a death of a grandparent or death of a parent. Now there's grief, there's loss, there's sadness. And now you might think, well, what kind of joy is there? Well, think of it as deepening of the self in relation to your potential. You're growing through understanding yourself and the life of this loved one in relation to this loss. And this process can happen together. You can have it while encountering very difficult life circumstances. And what you would feel is that these are life circumstances that are coming at me, but I'm growing in relation to that, so that there is that underlying joy that is moving with you.
That is such a powerful distinction. Really, really powerful. We'll talk some other time about this, but I'm developing this other course that also includes components of joy. So when I read how you distinguish these things, I was like, oh, that's so powerful. All right, ready to go into mind? Okay. So again, just to situate this, listeners and viewers, I like how she talks about the mind as our inner working, which we have to reflect on constructs and beliefs that contribute to our inability to get just what we desire the most, or our actual ability to do that. But the constructs and beliefs, I think, are really important to hone in here. So if we can now, let's treat the mind.
So, people say, well, why don't you just call them beliefs? And the reason for it is because I want people to understand that they're actually constructed over time. I call them construct because they're basically assumptions you have about the world that you act on. And sometimes you don't even know. For example, right now, if I lean back because I have an assumption that this chair has a back, right? Now, I don't have to verbalize it as a belief. I just simply act on it. As you grow up, you end up with, hundreds of thousands of constructs about the world. It's basically your whole information that goes into it's lenses through which you try to interpret things gets built. Some of them you can verbalize. You can say, oh yeah, I believe that this is the case, but most of them stay unverbalized. And the reason why I want people to think of them as construct is because often we end up with constructs about self or the world that are very destructive for us.
Yes.
Right. So we can have a construct, everybody's out to get me. Now think about how that one way of looking at the world can impair your relationships with your colleagues. It can impair your relationships with your family, impair your relationship with the loved ones. You end up being lonely in an isolation. So just one belief, one construct can basically destroy your life potentially. So, and they are the place where they're in the unconscious mind. And so by helping people understand how these constructs sit in the unconscious mind, I help them understand the limitations of just trying to use their conscious mind to think. People say, well, you have this limiting belief, just change it, think differently. What they don't understand is that you can't just change something through the conscious mind. You need to go into the unconscious and change it. It's a little bit like, let's say, if you have an employee who's suffering from imposter syndrome, so they're very, very good at their job, but their underlying construct is, I'm not good enough.
Yep.
I'm not smart. And you can tell them, listen, here's so much evidence that you're smart, and I believe in you, and everybody believes in you. People often give behavioral advice. Well, why don't you just sit every night and write down all the things that you're so successful? Or why don't you practice positive affirmations? And I tell people, your unconscious processes information at 11 million bits per second, okay?
Right.
Conscious mind does it at 50 bits per second, which means that, you can try to give yourself positive affirmations, but in any moment of stress, your unconscious mind is going to flood you with thoughts of not being good. So you can be, I'm good enough, I'm good enough, I'm good enough. But then you have to go to sleep. The conscious mind does not, and the unconscious has. So when we need to change something, we need to change it in the unconscious, right? So not that we behave as if we have self-esteem, or we try to ignore the voice that says you're not good enough. No, we go to the place that created I'm not good enough, and we make it go away.
That's so incredibly powerful. The mind, there's so much work to be done there. Okay, let's grab our last break here, Maja.
Mm-hmm.
We've been on the air with Dr. Maja Djikic. She is a personality psychologist specializing in adult development. She is an associate professor of organizational behavior and HR management, the executive director of the Self-Development Laboratory, and the academic director of the Rotman Executive Coaching Certificate Program at the Rotman School of Management, University of Toronto. We've been talking through her Wheel of Self concept here. And last we were just talking about the mind. After the break, we're going to talk about the body. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. I mentioned in the last break about my book, The Great Revitalization, coming out. What I did for you is I created a 3-page assessment that you can pull off my website to determine the extent to which your company is operating at today's standards. It's at gusto-now.com. If you are just now joining me, my guest is Dr. Maja Djikic. She's the author of The Possible Self, a leader's guide to personal development, which we've been talking about. So we've been talking about the Wheel of Self, and now I want to cover body. And to situate this, listeners and viewers, the way she writes, Maja, the way you write, I just want to read a little bit about how you talk about the body here, this part. You say, from an evolutionary perspective, we could think of our bodies as vessels made of the past, meant to act in the present while looking to the future. That is incredible. I have never in my whole entire life thought of the body like that.
And isn't it so interesting how much when we think of our bodies, we think numbers, we think cholesterol level
yes,
or height or weight. And we don't think really what were they meant to do? And really, they were meant to carry our learnings. And so everything in us really carries the learning. So our bodies where our history is written. And this history informs our actions in the present, looking to the future. And it becomes very, very the way that the body becomes very dangerous to us is that if you learn something and that learning ends up being very rigid and unmodifiable. So let's say you learn something like, I can't trust important people in my life, that you're going to replay that over again, because all these constructs that we have been talking about in the mind, the way that they are located really is in the neural pathways that have been created. So your memories, your learnings, your tendencies, it's all inside of the body. On one level, it's dangerous. On another level, it's extraordinary. If your history is in your body, you change things in the body. You don't necessarily change the past, but you change your tendency of how to interact in the future. I find that extraordinarily powerful.
I do too.
Yeah, particularly since, this is something I reflect a lot. Our parents pass on constructs to us that can be sometimes not very functional, right? So our parent can pass on a construct, you should really just never extend yourself beyond your family of origin. Like, that's your unit, therefore friends are not important. Okay, so and that will be passed on to you, and now you're living this out. Or they can pass on something dangerous, like, the way to discipline a child is to physically, corporally punish them. Now, what I find very interesting is that for every person that has changed this tendency, what they've created, so when you change one thing in yourself, you suddenly, you go from a person who comes from a family that doesn't talk about difficult things, and you become a family that talks about difficult things. Not only have you affected your family, you have affected now all the descendants of all of your children going into the future. So there's something about this moment in time that if you can change something in yourself and pass that new way of being onward, you're changing the future, not just for yourself, but for generations to come. It's a very powerful, to my mind, a very powerful thought.
I completely agree with that. And then when it comes to, transformation, let me just kind of start this bit with you so you can kind of build on this. But I found this just so incredibly powerful. You say, we're still talking about the body piece of it here. But you say insight may be necessary, but it is not sufficient for transformation. It needs to be joined with an experience that opens the lid to the closed construct, and only then can we update it, getting the wheel of self to move again. So this idea of, the idea of a closed construct sitting somewhere, and that's in our mind, right? The construct.
Nervous system.
The nervous system. Okay, gotcha. If you would speak to that, this is really exciting to think about, this notion of how you can really get focused on your body as part of the transformative process of the self.
For sure. So the construct, let's say you have a construct that I'm not good enough, that you ended up with from, let's say, I don't know, in first grade, somebody mocked you for not being able to spell a word or something like that. Okay, so that's a set of neural pathways that are just sitting in you. Psychologically, I would call it a construct, but physically what it is, it's a set of neural pathways. So then the question becomes, given that we can't get rid of the past, you can't get rid of the neural pathways, what would you do to produce what psychologically we call healing? Now, very few people talk about healing. What is healing? And oddly enough, the metaphor of a physical wound is very similar to what psychologically needs to happen. So first you need to find it. So let's say you had a wound on your body for a long time that just festered and you didn't pay attention to it. First you need to say, what hurts? Where? Then you need to reopen it. Then you need to apply something to it that will be curative. And then you need to, and the only difference is that often with physical wounds, it's a lot of time, but with psychological wounds, it actually can happen very rapidly. So when I looked at the literature to find what produces healing, there's fantastic work out there on trauma and all of these things. I found that most of the time that we have interventions, psychotherapeutic interventions, any kind of interventions, they often focus only on one or two of these parts of the self. They'll be like cognitive behavioral therapy, emotion-based therapy, or just behavioral intervention. And they are missing one part, and they're missing that body part. And when I went through literature of under what condition does that full healing happen, there were basically two things that were common to all empirically successful transformational processes. So it's based on this notion, and the thing that we know now in neuroscience, that basically when we're emotionally dysregulated, that brain becomes very plastic, which means that when dysregulated, when emotionally, when maybe afraid or just emotional, when we're emotional, that the brain lays down neural pathways very fast. This is how we can get traumatized very rapidly, right? Very dysregulated, the brain says, don't you ever leave the house again because you might get mugged again. Okay, and then we're stuck with that. So what I realized is when we look at successful, whether it's in therapy or out of therapy, successful transformation of healing, it always included dysregulation by the person themselves. So often, let's say in therapy, nothing happens because in therapy, you get to the point of insight. And then so you say, oh, yes, I know why it is that I feel like this, but I still feel like this, right? I know I don't feel good but I still feel like that.
Yep.
But the last step, usually what happens is that the person dysregulates themselves as often as they're thinking about the event, and they apply a new experience. So there's two components. Not somebody else dysregulating you, but you dysregulating yourself usually by replaying the event.
Yes.
The new experience, you're basically, dysregulation makes your brain plastic, and you add another experience on top of your old one. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that my wound is that I don't feel smart because first grade I got mocked by the teacher. So the technique that I've kind of cobbled together from like what worked was in writing, I'll write about this experience, and just writing about it is going to dysregulate me because it brings up a lot of emotion. And so I would say, when I was in first grade, my teacher came out and asked me to read it, and I'll feel it. And so now I have dysregulated, but now I need to bring this new experience. So what I suggest people do is that they mentally have their adult self walk onto the scene, support the younger version of the self as they deal with what happens after the experience. So I would say, after the experience, I would take my younger self and say, hey, it's okay. Doesn't mean you're not smart. You're a very smart kid, even though you're learning. This is what happens when you learn. I sometimes even have people include, give a little talking to your teacher and say, you know what, that's kind of inappropriate for a teacher to be mocking at. The point is, what are you doing? You're taking this set of neural pathways inside of your body, and you're not removing what has been, but you're adding what you needed at the time to have the construct healthy and open, which is sometimes I make mistakes, and that's okay. It doesn't make me stupid. It just means that I'm learning. That's an open construct. We add that on top of the other one. So when that happens very rapidly, what you see within a couple of days, people experience great relief. And basically what they've done is they've gone into the unconscious and changed something there. Don't come up anymore. There's no voice in the background saying, oh, you're not good enough. They have healed. And I find that possibility of healing and knowing how to do it yourself, or if you want, you can do it with somebody else, with a coach, with a therapist, whoever. But what's really empowering is to know that how healing happens, that it's possible to do, that it doesn't take a lifetime to heal. The way we say time heals everything. No, it doesn't. You can, if you have an unprocessed wound, psychological wound, you can be 95 and still have a wound from the first grade. Very frequently happens. So this process I find very empowering, and it produces that move that allows the whole wheel of self to suddenly start moving in developmental direction. I feel like I spoke a little bit too much. Tell me.
No, I'm hanging on every word. I'm so enthralled with how you have really helped me understand the body aspect in the wheel of self. I know you've said this already, but again, I want to read it again for our listeners and viewers because your language is just so beautiful. And then if you would speak to the future piece of what I'm going to read here. But you're talking about the two functions. The first function, of course, is that we want to be able to move to our wants. You say, unlike plants, we can actually go move our bodies toward our wants. And then you say the second function of our body is to carry our past, which we've been talking about. But it's so compelling the way that you say this. You say, We often forget that all our learnings, all our skills, and even many of our short and long-term goals are nothing more than projected fragments of our past experiences. They are carried by our brain and nervous systems, as well as the muscles, joints, organs, blood cells, immune cells, and many other constituents of the body whose actions in the present moment are altered by the memory of the past. We make our future by combining past experiences and learnings with current motivations and potentials. Bodies hold our learnings and employ them forward as we encounter new situations. They are magnificent and subtle learning machines.
They are.
I have never seen anything like that, Maja. That is so fantastic.
They really are. And if we carry something, if we carry a wound that prevents the body from being able to do what it needs to do to carry us to our potential, it's like carrying a sack of stones on your back. This is our baggage. This is our things that we can let go, so we can allow the body to do what it's best at, which is start to get us, continue to get us moving towards our potential, our never-ending work. Because every time you fulfill that potential, guess what happens? A whole new set of potentialities opens up for you, and on you go. We can live very engaged, very deep lives, all the way to the very end. People sometimes ask me, but what if you're 99 and you can't get out of bed? What could you possibly learn? And not to end on a morbid note, but you can learn how to say goodbye. You can learn how to end your life well. There's in every moment, no matter what we think our limitation, there is potential embedded in that. And that's our gift. And if we forget that and every day becomes, oh God, do I have to do this? And can I just get to my retirement, or do I just get to end of the day? We really have lost. We really lose. We lose our lives in the process.
Completely agree, Maja. And I appreciate also, you're also situating a certain way for us to embrace a certain construct or belief. And I completely align with that. So powerful. So I have so enjoyed learning from you, reading your book, sharing with my listeners and viewers. I think you know that this show is listened to by people around the world. And they either tune in because they want to learn something about themselves, how to improve themselves, they want to become more of an inspirational leader, or they want to be able to learn how to create those destination workplaces we've been talking about. What would you like to leave them with?
If you're a leader and you're listening to this, you have maybe been told, focus on your strengths. I would ask you, find that anchor that is holding you back. Find the wound that is preventing you from moving to a completely new level of leadership. Like, move that wheel in that domain of your life, and you will see how the future just opens up for you beyond of what you could have imagined. That's what we want, a future that even in our best possible scenario, we couldn't have imagined. And it's just a little bit of inner work.
Or sometimes a lot.
I will just
quickly echo that, Maja. I've had many conversations on this program. We are all members of the Walking Wounded. Every one of us. That's what life does. So that is beautiful, sage advice, Maja. A fantastic way to finish the show. Thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom, your heart, your mind, everything with Working on Purpose listeners and viewers.
My great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Listeners and viewers, you are going to want to find this woman, check out her work, learn more about Dr. Maja Djikic, the work that she does as a personality psychologist, and her new book, The Possible Self. So one place to start is her personal website. I'm going to say it for you, then I'm going to spell it for you. It's her name, Maja Djikic. And the way that you spell that is MajaDjikic, MajaDjikic.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on the air with Alex Budak. He is a UC Berkeley faculty member, social entrepreneur, author, and speaker who teaches a wildly popular course called Becoming a Changemaker. We talked about his book, Becoming a Changemaker, an actionable, inclusive guide to leading positive change at any level, which encourages every one of us to step into our capacity to make meaningful change, regardless of our role, position, or anything else. Next week, we'll be on the air with David Alexander, a commercial photographer whose book captures and celebrates our wonderfully complex connection to each other and all of nature. He'll be talking us through those concepts and those connections. See you there. And remember, work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.